ladies and gentlemen, welcome again, and let me just tell you one thing before I hand over the conduct of the conversation to Mária Schmidt. And the one thing is that this film tonight is the first of a series of evenings of films. We're going to have them at irregular intervals, but these films will in general be about communism or about post-communism, and they will generally be by the people who've made the film in some way. Some will be documentaries, some will be regular feature films, but they will all cover different aspects of the communist experience and the post-communist experience. The next one will be in about 2 weeks. I can't yet tell you the name of the film, but the person presenting the evening will be the distinguished American film critic James Bowman. Now, having said that, I think it's my job to really hand over to Mária Schmidt and fade into the background while she and David Satter conduct a conversation about the film you have just seen. If you want to, during the conversation, to bring your chairs closer, that's fine, please do so. But let me say briefly a word about Mária Schmidt. In fact, it's already been said because a lady came up to me at the end of the film and described an experience she'd had at the hands of Hungarian secret police, which was disturbingly similar to some of the items in David's film. And at the end of it she said, but nobody cares about that in Hungary today except Mária Schmidt. And of course anyone who's been to the House of Terror, the Museum of Communism and Fascism, knows what a powerful experience it is. It's a blend of history and imagination. It is history presented imaginatively and courageously. And someone who's been there several times, I want to thank her for making such an experience possible. It's not always a pleasant experience, naturally, but it is a powerful one that changes your point of view. And I might say something very similar about the film that we saw tonight from David. A lot of us here probably reinforced the point of view we had, but for anyone who had any doubts about communism, it would, I think, have changed their minds very powerfully. Now, having said that, this is a conversation, but it's a conversation in which you are invited to join. Mária will begin by asking you a few questions, but I think she's already told me to say that if you want to intervene at any point, to clear up some point, to make an argument of your own, to ask David about something in the film, please do so. This is not meant to be an occasion in which we talk to you. It's meant to be a conversation across the footlights, so to speak. So, having said that, let me thank David very much for the film, for being here. Let me thank my colleagues who made this evening possible, particularly Kalman, Eboya, and Ildiko. Let me thank the people who put on this extraordinarily pleasant evening of food, and it's an odd combination of high living here, but also profound and serious thinking. But it's a very pleasant occasion as well as a painful one in some respects. But let me now, having said that, and I'm very sorry if I haven't thanked everyone I should, but let me hand over to Mária and let the conversation begin. I will be an attentive listener.
Good evening. It's very odd that I have to speak in English in Budapest. That's the first time, but I will try my best.
Good practice.
Thank you. Some weeks ago, maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago, I was in Brussels, took part on a discussions on the planned European House of History, which should be a museum in Brussels on European history. And a French colleague of mine, a historian, said, because we began to discuss the collapse of communism in 89-90, and he said, oh, it was all about because the East European people wanted to have Coca-Cola and McDonald's. And all the West Germans and Dutch and Belgian and all these West Europeans, colleagues of mine, agreed. And that's the habit, always to think that we are people who cares only on food and things, material side of life, and that's why I'm so grateful for these films, because it's about the moral collapse of communism. It was not about the financial part of life, not about the empty shops, which were also always the situation, but it was about lies, fears, and about the moral collapse of the communist system. So I'm very grateful, therefore. So my first question is, you saw these people before the whole system was over. Did you expect something others after 20 years, or was it very familiar for you to see these people as they are today, not on the sunny side of the story?
Well, the world changed. The world is different today. When the fall of the Soviet Union and the fall of communism completely transformed the lives of people, and those persons who I knew in Moscow during the Soviet period, of course, have different lives completely than the lives they had at that time. But nothing was really that surprising. Those people who were still alive, they simply became normal. They stopped being heroes. They stopped being victims. They began to lead normal, uneventful lives. Of course, you could say that maybe that's a bad thing. Maybe we need some kind of dramatic situation to bring out the best in people. But unfortunately, my heroes were exceptions. Most people did not become better as a result of the communist system. The result of the communist system was, generally speaking, to make them worse. Or if indeed they were sincere about communism, it was to make them very stupid. And I think that the normality that we have now, even if it means that not everybody is forced to think about global questions, is still preferable for the moral development of people, because it allows them freedom and it allows them to live without external repression.
In Hungary and in all the former communist countries, people thought that justice will be done for them, and they can tell their stories. They will be treated as heroes or victims, and then the whole society will treat them in a respectful way. And most of the people have to acknowledge that that's not the situation they are facing. How is it in Russia?
It's not the situation in Russia either. Those people who achieved great power were those who had connections to the old system. Those people who were corrupt, those people who could use their connections in order to gain control of profitable pieces of the economy. Unfortunately, the fall of communism didn't completely purge communist habits. Many of the people who prospered under communism, they went on to prosper under capitalism. It's a sad thing, but this is what happened, and it happened not just in Russia, it happened throughout Eastern Europe. But the fact is that in a modern society, the sad thing is that those people tend to do best who are the most capable of manipulating the system. There was a case in Ukraine, one of those who spent literally decades in a labor camp, Vyacheslav Chornovil. Maybe some of you will even recognize the name of this Ukrainian political prisoner. He was killed in an automobile accident in Ukraine as under very suspicious circumstances, as he was trying to run for president of Ukraine. And which people triumphed in Ukraine? Were they those who had fought for Ukrainian freedom and independence? Far from it. They were those who had connections to the party apparatus, those who had been, who had connections to criminal circles. Same thing happened in Russia. So in effect, the fall of communism did not solve all problems. Far from it. Nonetheless, I think it's important to understand that the corruption that continued to exist in the post-communist world was itself a product of the communist system and the moral damage that was done by communism. Under the circumstances in which people are deprived of the idea that they themselves are responsible for their own behavior, and the notion of individual moral responsibility is denied, not just by the society, but by the ideology. It's almost too much to expect that there will be a miraculous recovery. But I think that the point that I would make is that for the Eastern Europe, for the former communist bloc, one of the most important factors in the moral recovery from communism is to understand what communism was. And it was with that in mind, actually, that I made that film. From the point of view of the United States, Great Britain, the West, it's important also to understand what communism was in order to better defend and value those things that the democratic countries of the West really have.
I had the impression that the Western world, United States of America or England or some other countries understood what communism was about in the 50s, in the 60s, and began to forget it from the 70s. And the most shocking fact for us is that there is no moral condemnation of communism from the side of the Western world. They are always supporting them. They are defending them. They are against that any attempt of our sides to get to terms with our former communists or our communist criminals.
Well, communism is very difficult for an outsider to understand because Nazism, the fascism, was openly cannibalistic. It was a race war. The annihilation of the inferior races by the superior races, or those who said that they were superior. They themselves decided they were superior. And for most people, this was pretty obvious that the evil of fascism is not difficult to understand. But communism did not advertise itself as a war to the death, or it did not idealize the animal world. Communism pretended to be humane. Communism wanted a paradise for everyone. They wanted to create heaven on earth. And it's only by analyzing what communism was, particularly in the post-Stalin era when the crimes were not so obvious, that it's possible to see the real evil that results from the destruction of moral judgment. I mean, after all, let's face it, communists would say that and people say this in Russia, I don't know if they say it in Hungary now, but maybe some people do, that in the communist system everyone had a job, everyone had medical care, there was pension, education, everyone was taken care of. They were taken care of at a very low level, of course, but nonetheless, everyone was taken care of. The price that people paid for that was that they lost all freedom and they were forced to live in a world of lies, that they surrendered all judgment to the authorities, which controlled them totally, and that every aspect of their life was subject to supervision by a all-encompassing and all-controlling government bureaucracy. Was it worth it? Well, for most people who regard being human as the right to express your views and the right to make your own moral judgments, it's not worth it. But there are people who make that argument, and those arguments can be persuasive if people don't understand the moral damage that was done by communism and the fact that human beings ceased to exist as individuals. They became simply raw material for the political regime. And that's since Western people never experienced that. They didn't experience a situation in which hundreds of thousands of people can be sent to work digging a canal somewhere, which is not even necessary, and that half of them will die from overwork. It's hard for them to imagine that such a thing is possible. And that's the reason why Westerners sometimes seem so naive. They look simply at the economic comparison and they say, well, communism had some features. It looks a little bit like the British welfare state, only carried to a more extreme degree. And they don't see the underlying moral damage, which is really the important thing when you're trying to consider such a system.
For us, for East and Central European countries who suffered under both totalitarian dictatorship, they are quite similar. And we cannot really express so big differences as you mentioned. I think that the intellectual elite of the Western society is corrupted by Marxism and Leninism and toward this kind of progressive way of thinking, and they had a very big impact of the political class, because the political class of the Western world was very well aware of the fact what is the Soviet Union is about, like in the 20s and 30s, because the United States of America was not ready to have diplomatic relationship with Russia until 34. The same happened between 24 until 34 in England. Winston Churchill sent poison gas to Russia in the Civil War, so they wanted to fight against communism. So it came only in the 70s that this intellectual elite in the Western world had such a great influence on the political class and on the societies of the Western world, that they tried to forget the criminal aspects of the socialist world.
I think you're overestimating how much the people in the West knew. One of the most, the Soviet regime concealed the extent of its crimes. One of the reasons why they did not allow any, during the 1932-1933 famine, which affected Ukraine, but it also affected the other areas in the Soviet Union. The Stalinist regime did not allow any relief efforts. And the reason for that, one of the reasons for that is that they wanted to conceal from the outside world what was going on. I can actually give an example from my own personal story, because my father was actually sympathetic to communism. And when I was a boy growing up in Chicago, I talked to him and I asked him, what about all these reports that there were slave labor camps in the Soviet Union? And this was in the 1950s, early 1960s. And he said to me he didn't believe it, because if there had been so many people enslaved, he said there might have been some abuses, but if there had been millions of people in slave labor camps, we would have had many more witnesses, and those witness accounts would have reached the West. And what he didn't understand at that time was that you can just destroy the people and destroy the evidence. Then, in 1961, and I remember this very well, Khrushchev spoke at the 22nd Party Congress, and he described in detail the millions of people who had been victimized under the Stalin regime. And I at that time was a teenager, and I asked my father, I asked him, what about what Khrushchev has just said? And he says, it looks like it was much worse than we realized. And you know, to his credit, he did not try to justify it at all. But then he died shortly afterward. And he died very young, so I never had a chance to talk to him further about it. But this was typical of many intellectuals in the West. They did not want to believe it, and the Soviet regime helped them not to believe it. They, when someone went to the Soviet Union, they weren't shown labor camps, and they weren't allowed to talk to people who had real experience. Those few people who went to the Soviet Union were surrounded by persons who provided them with false information. And this includes the journalists and diplomats and intellectuals who were for a long time were practically the only people who were going to the Soviet Union, because an ordinary American citizen just didn't go to Moscow for vacation. And they came back and spoke about the efforts of the Soviet people to create a workers' paradise. Why did they think that there was a workers' paradise being created? Because that's what people were telling them. And that's also what they wanted to believe. So it's not quite true that the West understood. In fact, many of the most brilliant people in the West, including the most brilliant writers and intellectuals, for a long time did not understand. And it was not an accident that those people who then became the leaders of the anti-Soviet, anti-communist movement in the intellectual community were persons who had at first been sympathetic. I mean, we have many, many examples. Ignazio Saloni, Richard Wright, Arthur Koestler, all of the people who Arthur Koestler's Hungarian, by the way. Yeah, all of the people who contributed. Well, there are many others. In any case, I think I make the point. it was not so obvious from the outside what was going on. And it may well have been that in terms of the total number of victims, that the communist regime may have even killed more people than the Nazi regime. Of course, they had much more time to do it. The Nazis had only 6 years to kill as many people as they killed. But that's another point. But it's a mistake to think that all of this information was available. It only began to become available in the 1970s with the public, with Solzhenitsyn's books, with the dissident movement, the beginning of the dissident movement. One of the things that the Soviet dissidents did was provide information about the Stalin-era repressions. And in fact, the reason why I met the people who were featured in the film was because there were dissidents in the Soviet Union in 1976 when I arrived there. If there had been no dissidents, how would I have met those people? How would I have met someone who had been treated in a psychiatric hospital after trying to escape to Finland? I met him through the dissidents who had contacts all over the country. And it was only because of changes that took place in the Soviet Union that information began to surface. So in terms of the West and the West's understanding of what happened, this has to be taken into account.
I have a question, you know.
Yeah.
Don't you think that there is a metaphysical and a theological problem also? In other words, both Nazism and communism created evil in ways and to extents which are really improbable and inconceivable for normal people.
Yeah.
In other words, in a sense, you know, Satan appeared on the stage in the 20th century, and even in the case of Auschwitz, you know, very few people knew about it, and very few people believed it until to really, you know, there 2 Slovakian inmates managed to escape, and in February, I think, in '44,
Yeah.
their reports were then spread in diplomatic course. It's the same case, really. Don't you agree with that? With communism?
I mean, the fact that you mentioned the question of metaphysical issue, the question of are we dealing with a really metaphysical evil? This is very important, and it's actually the most important question concerning communism and also Nazism. And I want to come to it in a moment. But on this question of Auschwitz, this was wartime, and the leadership of the United States received a report from Jan Karski, the Polish courier, who had entered the Warsaw Ghetto and escaped to the United States and informed President Roosevelt that the Nazis were embarking on the annihilation of the entire Jewish population of Europe. But for even for those people who were living, for example, in Hungary or in other countries and not yet affected by the machine of extermination, it was so hard to believe that such a thing was actually happening, that they didn't believe it until they were forced to believe it in many cases. But on the question of the real question that you raise, which is the fundamental question, is what is it that connects these two systems, Nazism and communism? And this is something that people always get wrong. it's basically the ideal, it is the absolutization of a man-made political goal which is treated as a transcendent absolute. It's when Lenin in 1920 or 1919 gave his speech to the Komsomol in Moscow, in which he explained communist morality. He explained it in very simple terms. He said, we do not believe in any transcendent source of morality. We don't believe in any abstract morality. We don't believe in any permanent standard of right and wrong. For us, morality is defined exclusively by the interests of the proletariat. Anything that works in the interest of the proletarian revolution, for us is automatically moral. Anything that gets in the way of the proletarian revolution is immoral. Therefore, any moral scruples about murdering people, for example, are in fact immoral because they get in the way of the progress of the revolution. In the communist cosmology, there's no ultimate sense of right and wrong. There's only the interest of the working class. The working class is represented by, of course, the Communist Party, which may have nothing to do with the working class in reality, but it likes to act in its name. And the Communist Party is organized to be completely subordinated to its leadership. Case of Hitler actually did not invent anything new. All he did was he changed the source of morality. Instead of it being the interests of the working class, it was the interests of the master race. But morality, by its very nature, has to be transcendent. This is the meaning of metaphysics. This is in fact, the conviction on the part of people that there is a source of legitimacy that exists over and above the interests of society. You take some aspect of society, whether it's the supposed interests of the working class, which of course in fact are not served under communism, but that's another issue, or the supposed interests of the so-called master race, which by the way were not served either under Nazism, and treat those as the ultimate source of morality and the new absolute, you have a prescription for mass murder. And that's exactly what happened. Now the difference, of course, was that those two ideologies were, in terms of their content, somewhat different. And they imposed different patterns of behavior up to a point. But there's a famous moment that many of you maybe are aware of, when the deputy to Felix Dzerzhinsky, who was the first head of the Soviet secret police, the Cheka, his deputy issued some instructions on interrogating people. He said that when you interrogate a suspect, his guilt is not a question of whether he actually committed a certain act. For you, the important question is, what class does he belong to? Does he own property? Is he connected to the imperial family or the former regime? And it is these questions which will determine his innocence or guilt. So it was Lotsis was his first name. Maybe someone remembered it was his last name. Maybe some of our well-educated people remember his first name, which I've forgotten. But it was Lotsis, the deputy to Felix Dzerzhinsky. In any case, so from the very beginning of the Red Terror in 1918, the principle was established of that guilt has no relationship to responsibility, and that people can be exterminated on the basis of their belonging to one or another social group. Nazis, of course, made it a racial criteria, but the principle is the same.
I agree, but 25 years passed since the fall of communism, and there is no attempt from the Western world to understand what we went through. So if we want to speak about it or want to mention what happened during communist time, they always began to talk about Nazism and about Holocaust. Why is it?
Should I?
Yes, and after.
And then you have a question about well, Nazism was easier to understand. What? Just white line. Yeah. Why don't you go ahead and ask your question, then we'll try.
Well, I would return to your original position on relating to the mentality or the receptivity of the English-American society of those times.
Yeah.
My question could be crude as well, just asking whether is it an excuse or just a description?
Excuse or just
excuse or just a characterization of the situation? Because I would claim that in my own personal library, I do have all of the first edition English-American works from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, especially 50s in the United States, and 60s, early 60s, which have described everything. And if you were interested, then you've had the amount and full of richness of German libraries, Hungarian libraries, Finnish literature translated into Hungarian, so everything was known. I mean that this characterization of the American society is, let's say, more a shame than an excuse of a given situation.
Okay, let me try to respond to both of what you're saying. Yes, it was. If you're leaving one thing out, though. There's something missing in what you're saying. Yes, you're right. For some, but the critical thing, it was there for someone who wanted to find it, and it was not obvious, and it was, generally speaking, people who were motivated to look for those first-hand accounts and those truthful analyses that who were able to present a more or less truthful picture, and there were always some such people. But there were two problems. First of all, it required a commitment. It required a desire to find the truth and to pursue the truth with complete impartiality, which frankly you don't find in very many societies. But there's a second problem, which was maybe even more important, was that communism appealed to the dream of people that they could participate in the creation of a better society. And everyone who was in those people who were dissatisfied with the status quo, particularly young people who did not want to make a career for themselves in business, making money, which they might have considered to be either not interesting or not idealistic. Those people were attracted to an idea which seemed to offer a prescription for making the world better. This comes to Maria's question about the difference between Nazism and communism. The idea of Nazism simply did not have the universal appeal that communism had. It had appeal among Germany under certain circumstances. Right now it has no appeal in Germany either. But because of the crisis of German society, and the demagogic skills of Adolf Hitler, something that was absolutely insane and barbaric was adopted by millions of people. And at that point, never forget the power of group dynamics. It's not that the Germans of that time were somehow different from all people anywhere in the world. The problem is that the average individual living his life is not able to resist the power of the organized mass. And once that mass becomes organized, even behind something that is absolutely crazy, it's very difficult for an ordinary person to answer it, to defend his individuality. He can become swept up in it, and that's what happened in Germany, especially under conditions in which Germany had lost the war. But in the case of communism, which actually, and if you read Marx, it's a powerful criticism of contemporary society. In order to answer it, you have to answer it at a very profound level, at a very profound moral level. Most people are not prepared to do that. They reject it on the basis either of common sense, or they're forced to think at a level that most people are simply not going to become involved with. That's why communism was much more effective worldwide in appealing to people than Nazism ever will be. And this goes to Maria's question, because Nazism the evil of Nazism is obvious. It's easy to condemn, and a great deal about it is known, in part because Germany lost the war, the death camps were opened up, and a lot is still hidden in the communist world. But more to the point, the ideology of communism seemed to many people to have good intentions, which is something you could never say about Nazism. And that made all the difference.
In my understanding, the Soviet Union lost also the war, the Cold War, and the United States of America won it, in my understanding. And I think those people who lived under communist rule never accepted the beautiful prospects of communism and the nice ideology. We were just not willing to live under communist rule, because it's just based on lie and on fear and on terror, and that's why we just began to fight against it in '56. But I think that the most normal relationship to the communist world was in the Western world, was in the United States of America. Normal American people were always anti-communist. Those who respond on this appalling aspect of the communist ideology were university professors, and maybe they are still on that track. But normal American people were always anti-communist. The problem is that in Western Europe, most intellectuals, like at the United States universities, are attacked by, use the word and the language of Marx till today, and they just are not willing to acknowledge the facts, what we all know since 1917. And it was said from the very highest level of the Communist Party, from Khrushchev, in the different congresses. It was showed in 53, in 56, in 68, by Solzhenitsyn work, in the all Polish and other underground work. And these Western intellectuals just are not ready to understand it. But it's not because the message of the poor face of communism is so difficult to understand. It's because they are so unwilling to do it, because they lied also. They also supported the Soviet communist regime since the 70s. And that's the fact we are facing right now, when we have a misunderstanding in order to see the whole communist world.
Is there anyone else who wants to ask anything? Because
I want to ask a question, but I think this gentleman does.
What I would like to know is what is the chance of...
Oh, you can just take the microphone.
What I would like to know is what is the chance of the European Union condemning communism as a crime against humanity? Why are they so reluctant to do it?
I think you might want to answer that. Do you want to answer that? Sure. Maria knows that. Thank you.
We achieved something. It's very difficult. The lefts are in majority, and the right parties, the People's Party, is not very brave at all in fighting ideological battles. But slowly, we will achieve it. I think in 5 years we will get it. I'm pretty sure.
David, my question goes on from that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, my question is a very simple one. There is obviously a family resemblance between communism on the one hand and socialism on the other, even to a degree.
Do you mean Nazism, or you say communism and socialism?
Yes, that's right. Not National Socialism. I'm moving away. I'm talking about modern socialism. I mean, so there are differences, of course, but they both are aiming at a certain kind of regulated society with a lot of government control and direction, redistributed taxation, policies of a leveling kind designed to achieve equality, and so on and so forth. Now, I'm not saying they're exactly the same thing, they're not, but there is a family resemblance, and they're often going in the same direction. Now, when I look at your film, I remember particularly the kind of euphoria a lot of us felt at the collapse of communism. It was a wonderful moment, and of course much more important to people in countries like Hungary than it was when I was living in New York at the time, but still I felt that we were moving to a better world. And I didn't think it was possible, particularly when the ruins of the controlled economy were revealed in these countries. I didn't think it was possible for those ideas to make a comeback. But I may be wrong about this, and I may be over-pessimistic, but I see quite a lot of signs that in the form of kind of a fairly aggressive socialism, these ideas are coming back into fashion. Now, I think we can all give reasons for it, but my question really is, are you worried? I mean, let me give you one example. Opinion polls in the United States show that there is a great deal of support, particularly among young people, for socialism, as described as such. And in another example, the comedian Russell Brand was recently interviewed the other night on BBC television, in which he advanced the case for what seemed to be a communist society. I mean, it was far more aggressive in its approach than say, a social democrat would argue for. But are we finally rid of this, or is it coming back to haunt us in a slightly disguised way? And why have people, so to speak, ignored the lessons of such a recent past?
Well, I think that here we get to this is really an important distinction. People often say that there's a family resemblance between totalitarian communism on the one hand and what's often called social democracy. In any case, a situation in which there's a very highly developed welfare state. This was the reason why so many people sympathized with communism. They made the mistake, but from the other direction. But in fact, the two have nothing in common. The economics, what existed in the Soviet Union and what existed in Nazi Germany really are two varieties of the same moral phenomenon. The way, I mean, the way in which people choose to organize the economy really doesn't have much to do with the moral issue of communism. The fact is, of course, the one thing that we have learned from communism is that an economy run by a bureaucracy, by a government bureaucracy, is inefficient and is irrational, and that it doesn't serve people's needs. We've learned that much. And if we're going to say, well, why would people, embark on that when we've seen how it doesn't work? Okay, I would agree with that. But the mass killing that took place was not the result of the desire to give everybody free medical care. It was, on the contrary, the result of the adoption of a pseudo-religion, which was based on politics. And that's the key. That was what led to mass murder, both in the Soviet Union and in Nazi Germany. So it's very important to keep those things separate. The Nazi Germany, in fact, did not have a socialist economy, except they had, of course, they were organized for war, but that's a different matter. It was basically a capitalist economy. And the capitalists did very well under the Nazis. Yeah. But the point is that how you choose to organize an economy is a separate issue. I mean, experience has shown us that a state-run bureaucratic economy, or an economy that stifles private initiative, is not going to be very efficient, and it's not going to lead to prosperity. Okay. But what the world really, I mean, and people who are very smart about these things can make that argument and point out, if they wish, that it's really better in the long run for everyone if private initiative and is given the opportunity to create wealth. But the real moral issue that faces the world is not that. The real issue is the question of whether we are going to face a political religion which takes upon it, which arrogates itself the right to wipe out millions of people. I mean, we have the same phenomenon, say, now with Islamic extremism. Oh. And that, by the way, is because so many people think that communism is just a form of social democracy, they sympathize with it.
I think we have one last question. This has to be the last one.
Go ahead.
What I really appreciate in that film, that those people who we saw in that film did not want to be heroes. They just wanted to have normal life. They just wanted to travel, wanted to be free. And this struggle for freedom was what really was so typical for our life in the communist period.
They ended up being heroes in some cases, but they didn't intend to be. You're exactly right. All they wanted was to live their lives. Anyway.
Apparently the last questioner is my wife.
Yes.
Oh.
I'm using spousal privilege here. Maria, this story you told about this asinine Frenchman who said that, oh, you Eastern Europeans just wanted Coca-Cola. Would he have been surprised at the information in this film tonight, this very excellent, powerful film that put a face on some of these statistics? Would he have been surprised?
Yes, I think that's why these films are so important, because it said that it was not so important for them to be able to go to drink Coca-Cola and eat McDonald's or to buy something which are pretties or so. It was about freedom. What we wanted in that region, we wanted to be free. We wanted to be independent, we want to get back our national independence, and we want to be free. And that was all about. But those people in Western Europe, they have nothing else as money in their mind. That's so sad. I think it was really a very, very sad kind of document on their state of mind, and not how we lived under socialism.
We have to wrap this up, but David, your very last word.
Last word.
Well, my last word is to thank all of you for coming. I was very glad to meet you all.
My last word is to thank you for coming as well, to thank our speakers, to say keep a watch, because we'll be having other evenings like this and we'd like to see you back at them. Thank you.
You even put